trying to put three-dimensional objects together in space with plates and screws, it takes a building approach. And often, they are inefficient. We're hoping with a glue that really can change how a surgeon can put the patient back together more efficiently in surgery. Most glues, even like in everyday use, requires the surface to be dry. Our material is different in that it actually is looking for water. Water is actually a good thing.
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech Podcast, where I speak with industry leaders shaping the future of medtech. I'm Damian Medarski, and my guest today is Brian Hess, CEO of RevBio, a commercial stage medical device company developing and commercializing a revolutionary bone adhesive biomaterial that aims to transform bone repair. Brian, thank you for joining me today.
Nice to have you. Thank you.
So I know I've kind of in my introduction mentioned commercial stage medical device, but also developing and commercializing. And I'm very excited to dig deeper into that. We know each other a couple of years time now, and I've been very impressed by what you're building. So I'm hoping by starting at the origins, we can actually paint a much nicer picture for the audience. So bone fixation, I'm sure everybody in the audience will be aware, hasn't meaningfully changed in a long time. What did you see that made you believe that what you're developing or what you were about to develop is going to fix a broken space?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the technologies that are out there, to a certain extent, have worked over years. And because of that, maybe people haven't recognized the need or the opportunity to really make a change. But from my point of view, the type of materials that are used for bone fixation involve metal, traditionally, metal plates and screws, for example, or rods. Those are the type of materials that they just don't, when you think of the human body, it doesn't naturally correspond to what our body is made out of. Terms like biomimicry, that's a term that I always thought was really cool. Why not try to re-engineer the body when it's broken with materials that look and feel like the body? So I thought that was a more natural approach to solve these problems. And I think with such an approach, of course, can the technologies overcome the needs? If you had such materials, I thought, and many people believe this, that would really be inspiring. And you could really build a platform upon which the body not only could be fixed in the short term, but lead to a more natural solution long term. And so that's what's really inspired me, is to use biomimic type of materials to solve these problems.
And obviously using the material, it's a significant improvement rather than an incremental innovation. Coming in from Stryker and in Vivo, how did you assess that technology to begin with?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do think in many ways it is a breakthrough technology, but it is also incremental. So for example, there are biomaterials, which our material is, that are used and have been used to help regenerate bone. Our material is used to help regenerate bone. There are also materials that help fixate bone that are biomaterials. There are resorbable plates and screws. But there's never really been a material that does the combination of both those actions. A material that can essentially glue and fixate, but at the same time regenerate. And I think that is absolutely novel and leads to a breakthrough technology, because now you bring a realm of elegance to the surgeon's hands that I think transforms the way they approach their surgeries. And it also transforms possibly how the patient can go through their healing phase after surgery. Perhaps it means they can return to activity sooner and with less pain. Perhaps they recover to more of a full recovery to where they were before their injury. All of these sort of improvements, I think, allow us to say this is really going to be a breakthrough in the field of surgical bone repair.
So you've already hinted to it, but maybe you can elaborate even further. What are the biggest clinical and economic inefficiencies with plates and screws that people outside the space underestimate?
Sure. So it sort of depends on what the surgeon is doing in surgery to put things back together. I think a classic example would be an orthopedic trauma surgeon trying to put back a really complex broken bone where there are many fragments. Those are really hard in surgery and difficult to piece back together. In many cases, the bone is devitalized, and so they can't use it. They have to remove it. And so that can leave a gap. And so trying to put three-dimensional objects together in space with plates and screws, it takes a building approach and can take quite a bit of time. And often, they are inefficient as a result. And they may not realize that because that's what they have available. We're hoping with a glue that really can change how a surgeon can put the patient back together more efficiently in surgery. If you're quicker in surgery, there tends to be better outcomes long-term for the patient. They're under anesthesia for less amount of time. There's less cutting and piecing things together, so less surgical trauma. We can make our material be applied through injection, through less invasive techniques. So all of these elements can really help the surgeon be more efficient, which we think will then lead to a better response for the patient after surgery in their healing phase.
So you combine adhesion, you combine load-bearing strength and regeneration. How do you technically achieve all three without compromise?
That's a great question. First and foremost is the innovation of adhesion. We're talking about chemical adhesion to the surface of bone and also to hardware, because in some situations, we will be augmenting hardware fixation. But the real technical breakthrough was a combination of materials that the body recognizes and doesn't reject and allows for underwater adhesion. That was the breakthrough. That adhesive capability really puts us on a trajectory, like I talked about before, of what kind of tool and value we're providing to the surgeon now that they did not have currently or before this. And so that allows them to get intraoperative fixation with a degree of load-bearing strength that helps hold things together strong enough to allow them to exit surgery. And maybe they'll still be in a brace of some type, but immediately after surgery, the body starts to respond to the material. And what's unique about our material is that it both is resorbed, but it also helps to stimulate new bone. There's a therapeutic component to it. And the buildup of new bone happens at a pace faster than the breakdown of our material. And that's fundamental, because if it was the other way around, all that great work you did putting things together, if it fell apart before new bone fully bridged the gap, obviously you would have a problem. And so we've been able to demonstrate with our technology through preclinical testing and clinical testing that the biological response is that new bone is depositing on our material and through our material faster than material is going away. And it does go away on the order of several months to a year. And so that's clinically relevant time frame. It's not too quick, but it certainly is fast enough that it allows the patient to be fully healed in clinically relevant timelines.
And you've also mentioned wet environment as well. How important is the ability to bond in a wet surgical environment in terms of real world usability?
Well, the human body's wet. Obviously, you have blood and sealing that's used in surgery to sort of rinse. So that probably has been one of the reasons that adhesion has been a property that has not been achieved yet. It's not as if surgeons didn't desire a glue. They've always talked about it. They've published on it. If we only had a glue. But the need was high. It needed to work in a wet field environment. And most glues, even like in everyday use, requires the surface to be dry. Our material is different in that it actually is looking for water. It's a hydration type of reaction. And so water is actually a good thing. And so blood is comprised mostly of water. And of course, saline is used in surgery. And so this liquid sort of aqueous medium is actually fundamentally is a need that's fundamental that a glue can withstand. And our material has been designed such that it behaves very well in an underwater environment.
Thank you. So you call the material Tetranite, and you've strategically positioned your branding behind that as well. And I know you're having several indications where you're targeting to actually utilize the material. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we definitely think that the value of this material is many different indications, literally from head to toe. I mean, the entire skeleton, if you think about it, is where our material can be used. And so naturally, there's no real set limit on what it could be used for. And I talked about it. Anywhere there's a broken bone or a gap in bone, our material can be injected or delivered as an interposition between those bones. Anywhere there's a gap or a loose fit for an orthopedic screw, our material can essentially work as a thread locker to lock that screw to bone. So fixation is a fundamental problem we're solving, and immediate fixation, but then also the ability to regenerate bone. And so these needs are across the body. We're starting with a beachhead, no pun intended, but in the cranium, right? So we think that's a great spot because the surgeon has relatively defined approaches with the craniotomy. They make the surgical cut to create a segment of bone that's removed so they can gain access for brain surgery. And so at the end of that surgery, they put that bone flap back, and there's quite a bit of surface area there. And so glue across quite a bit of surface area means it's going to have high rigid fixation forces. So we knew this would be a great place to demonstrate fixation. And then it would also be a defined median for bone regeneration. It's a defined gap. It's about a 2 millimeter cut line, 2 millimeter in width. And so we knew that our material would serve as a nice scaffold for bone regeneration. And so our preclinical evidence and early human data that we've collected from our pilot study has demonstrated that. So those demonstrations, in combination with the fact that we're near neural tissue and that we're safe, is just a great exposition of not only efficacy, but safety. And so now we can really think about going throughout the entire body, whether it's down the spine, adjacent to neural structures, or into other cavities and cracks and fractures throughout the body. And that is our plan. We have many programs currently under development in sort of parallel to approach all of these different great anatomic regions and indications for treating these types of patients.
Yeah. Thank you. And also you're preparing for an upcoming pivotal trial as well. What endpoints really matter versus standard of care?
That's right. For cranial flap fixation, we are starting our pivotal human trial this next month in May. And what we're looking to do is do a controlled study where we compare just over 100 patients with Tetranite as an adhesive to fixate that bone flap back, compared to plates and screws, which is the standard of care. And what we're going to look at is maintenance of fixation. Is it rigidly stable during surgery, and does it maintain its stability? And then we will also look for several endpoints around lack of adverse device-related events over the healing period, because there could be adverse events, and we know there are adverse events with the standard of care. For example, the plates and screws can back out and they become mobile, and therefore the flap becomes mobile. We also know that over time, the flap doesn't always fuse as rigidly as you would like. Fibrous tissue can get in the way. And so that can lead to mobile flap syndrome, where again, the flap is mobile and you don't get fusion. There can be infections over time. And so there's several complications that are potential. And so our clinical study will compare essentially complication rates along with efficacy. Does it maintain rigidity over the course of healing? We'll also look at bone healing using CT scans from baseline at the time of surgery all the way out to 6 months, 1 year. And we'll be able to discern how well our material is being essentially substituted with new bone inside that cut line. And we'll be able to compare that new bone to the level of new bone that's formed in that cut line in the flaps treated with plates and screws. So it's a very well-designed study. We work with the FDA on it. Many relevant clinical endpoints that were defined in conjunction with our neurosurgical advisory team. And so at this point, we're really excited to initiate this study.
And I'm curious, when surgeons first see or are able to use Tetranite, what is their initial reaction, and where do you still face some resistance?
Well, before they try it, they have an idea of maybe what a glue is. And often it's a little different, but different in a good way. They're very pleased because they've never had a material that has the handling properties in a wet field. Our material doesn't dissociate. It doesn't sort of wash out, if you will, when it's in that wet field environment. So that's usually a very remarkable property and is very standard. The resistance will naturally just be like, how do I take the jump and start using less metal hardware to no metal hardware? And so I think that's why we've had to think about which indications we go after first. While we are replacing plates and screws for neurosurgical fixation, it's a logical place because it's a relatively low load bearing type of indication. You're not walking on your head, right? So it's more acceptable that could be a replacement. When we go to fracture fixation in your arms and legs, we're looking at augmenting metal plates and screws, not replacing them. So again, that's a natural introduction pathway for those surgeons to get comfortable with our material. And then the future will look at starting to replace metal. And so we are very thoughtful in how we're starting to approach each one of these surgical indications. And that's a way to mitigate some of the surgeon feedback or resistance to adopt. And we think that is natural for a surgeon to have resistance, but I think this is a nice glide path for most to accept.
Yeah. And I think it was something like 10% of people, and that translates onto surgeons as well. They're very much inclined to try new things even before they're proven. But then you have the next 70% are people that are a little bit more sitting in the middle, where they would like to see some progression and results before they start utilizing it. And then you have the remaining 20 are the conservatives that are a lot harder to convert.
Yeah.
So naturally, following that progression of seeing the benefits of it to begin with, while you're introducing new indications and new usage, is the strategic, smart way to do it.
Yeah, and I would say in order to prove our technology out, we are doing clinical studies. We are generating data, objective data, in many cases, controlled studies like I just talked about, where we now will have data that we will then review with the FDA or regulatory bodies, but also through peer-reviewed research manuscripts and publications. And so when we do launch the product, I think we'll be in a very unique place because we'll have clinical data to demonstrate. Very often products that come to the market and they're substantially equivalent through the 510K process, and they don't really have anything to differentiate or claim differentiates their product. We're going to be coming to market with a different approach. We'll actually have clinical data to help showcase what the differences are and the advantages.
And obviously, we've mentioned cranial flap fixation, but you're also developing multiple other indications in parallel to demonstrate platform breadth. Maybe you can share a little bit more.
Yes. Well, it would be natural to start with one indication and expand. And for the most part, we have. I mean, our company has been in existence over 10 years now, and we started with a very focused approach, and then we start to advance. And the reason we're able to do that is because we've developed capabilities and know-how in-house. We now have a manufacturing process that can manufacture product efficiently. And when there's changes, maybe the formulation changes a little for each indication, we're very quick relative to what that speed would look like if we outsourced. And because it's a core competency at this stage, it allows us to leverage our workforce efficiently. Same with our product development process. We know how to engage with the FDA. And so we can anticipate questions and have answers the first time we come to the FDA. And so we're more efficient now. And so I would say we're leveraging our know-how at this stage to go after multiple indications. And to our investors, which is a very natural question they would have, how do you do it? Is it too much? I would say it's because we've built the base of our company over this time, developed these capabilities. It's now our strategic advantage to leverage those capabilities to go after the platform and really maximize the value of the technology with respect to the patent lifeline, right? The patents only have so much life. And so we have, on the other side of the coin, we have to compete with how much are we able to get done in the patent life? And by starting to go with a staggered parallel approach, we now can start to show that we're maximizing the value of our portfolio.
Yeah. But also in the essence of the problem, there is bone. And obviously your material is interacting with that bone in the same way, no matter what the application or the indication is. So it's very logical step to be able to apply it across dental, spine, trauma, and animal health as well.
Yeah, sure. Every bone has some nuances, but bone is bone, and chemical adhesion to bone doesn't change. Our material works across the body the same way. So for fixation, we're solving the same problems of fixation and bone regeneration. So fundamentally, we're driving down a network of highways in a car, and we can go down different lanes and we should be successful. Every lane we go down has its own, unique sets of risks. But I think our fundamental approach of trying to identify the risk early with the surgeons that we work with helps to mitigate those risks. There's sort of some intel in our process to look around the corner. And so we can anticipate what's coming. And I think now that we've had years of experience developing the programs, it really makes sense to leverage the technology and go after multiple indications.
And you've mentioned something interesting about in-house manufacturing and the capability and know-how to change and maybe slightly amend the product. How do you decide what to build internally versus what could be partnered or licensed out?
Well, that's a great question. I think we tend to take on more internally than outsourcing, probably because the experience we have. I myself and several others have years of med tech experience in our company. And so we tend to have the know-how. So we favor on in-house versus external partnering. But we also realize there's going to be some great opportunities to really leverage the platform through a partnership approach here in the future. I talked about manufacturing as a key in-house activity that we truly want to own, because it is a relatively simple technology to manufacture, which is good, keeps our cost structure low. But to be able to make changes in, say, particle size quickly or packaging for the different indications, that allows us to have relatively quick product development cycles. And so that's a capability that we absolutely like to have internal. But there are some opportunities where we're starting to partner moving forward. For example, execution of our clinical studies. We think it makes sense to partner with firms that have done clinical trials before. They know those risks. They have relationships with hospitals. They understand the complexities of clinical trial. That makes sense to partner. And so that's an approach we are taking to partner. And we may even partner on some of the indications in the future. We've got over 30 indications on our pipeline that could be opportunities for us, but we're not going to go after 30 at once. But we could outsource with the know-how and give them the product development playbook. And perhaps there's opportunities for other entrepreneurs or strategics to get involved to really harness the full potential of this technology. So I think we are starting to mature as a company and realize where the right opportunities are to outsource.
Amazing. And 30 indications, you rarely hear that about any other medical device product being developed nowadays. And I'm assuming you're already there, but at what point do you consider RevBio being a platform company versus a portfolio of products?
That's a great question, because we do have a sort of like a pipeline of products, as you said, off the platform. So that is true. And then are we a platform company? I think the bone adhesive technology is right to be consider a platform. And then the question is, what other platforms out there could sort of combine with our material? And that's the kind of thinking that we're starting to think about, because when you think about surgical robots, that's a platform. And how to anticipate how a surgeon works using preoperative planning and cutting guides that are anticipated, and cutting paths and the control using imaging technologies. We think about how our technology might enable that even further. And so I do think there's a future where we can combine platforms to the surgeon and take the next evolution or revolution in transforming surgery as well. And so I think we're trying to get our first products to market, right? And we're nearly there. As we talked about, we're in the clinical phase. And for some indications, we're in the pivotal trial phase. So once we get products to market, we can kind of start to claim ownership that we know the full development cycle. And then we can start to look at, well, how can our platform of a bone adhesive technology that's regenerative, how can that combine with other platforms to scale? And so I think in the years to come, there'll be opportunities to really explore that with more real examples of what we're doing to become such a company.
Smart. That's very smart. So before we get into fundraising, and I'm well impressed on that front as well, maybe you can just help listeners and viewers understand each indication, at what stage you are, so that we summarize your developments per indication.
So every indication starts on the bench, goes through preclinical and then clinical before getting the regulatory approval. And each indication, as I said, sort of leverages off each other, becomes more efficient over time. We have 7 indications that are under development as we speak. 4 of them are in the clinical phase. So that means they've gone from bench through preclinical testing and have now gained regulatory approval to be tested in humans. Those are the cranial flap fixation indication I talked about. We have 2 dental indications, dental implant stabilization. That also is in the pivotal phase. And we also have dental bone grafting. That's in the human pilot phase. And then the 4th indication is orthopedic fracture fixation of extremities, so your arms and your legs. That indication is FDA approved, and we're starting a human pilot study as well. So 4 of the 7 are in the clinic, and then 3 of our indication are in late stage preclinical testing. We have 2 indications in spine that are in late stage animal studies. They call them pivotal animal studies. So the data generated from these studies will allow us, obviously, if the data supports it, will allow us then to go into humans for those spinal indications. And that's for pedicle screw fixation and vertebral compression fractures. And then the 7th indication is also in late stage animal studies. And that's for, it's a dental indication. It's where we load Tetranite, our product, with a therapeutic. In this case, it's a non-opioid pain therapeutic. And so what we're looking to treat are patients with molar extractions. So wisdom teeth extractions are very painful. And often such patients are given narcotics to treat that pain, like an opioid. And unfortunately, there's a risk of becoming addictive, or they call it substance abuse disorder. And so, pardon me, with our approach, we're using a non-opioid therapeutic that leaches out of our material at the extraction site. So it's a localized approach. And so that's our 7th indication, and that's in late stage development. So as you can see, we're fairly far along with our pipeline of products. And hopefully the next round, we move those few into the clinic, and a few of those clinics through full regulatory approval to commercialization in the next couple of years.
It's incredible, to be honest, and leading on to funding and fundraising. I know that you've relied significantly on non-dilutive funding, and you've been amazing at obviously securing non-dilutive funding to get to this stage. How intentional was that in de-risking the platform early on?
I don't think we realized how important that was until it happened. We always heard of grant funding, but we never knew how it worked. This is like 6, 7, 8 years ago. We tried, we failed, we tried, we failed. And then COVID happened, and it became perhaps more of a need at that point because we had obstacles in front of us in terms of getting work done, finding capital. And so we kept writing our grants, and we won. We finally had a breakthrough in winning our grant, and that led to a 2nd grant, a 3rd grant. And so that really enabled us through the COVID years to keep all of our operations going and make progress on these new indications. Each one of these grants moved along an indication or enabled us to start a new indication. And so here we are since COVID, and looking back, we've won over 10 grants through the NIH, through the Small Business Innovation, SBIR innovation grants, totaling over $20 million. And so that non-dilutive funding has really been our lifeline and our strategy. It's allowed non-dilutive funding and very reliable funding. And it's also helped validate our technology because as we interface with investors to augment that funding, they gain a real sense that the science is real because each one of these applications has been vetted and reviewed by a scientific review team. And so I think that strategy has worked out really well for us. And I think it has become a secret part, not really secret, but it has been a huge component of our success in the last 5 years.
Yeah, no doubt. And as I said, I've been very much impressed by what you have done to the degree that whenever I meet a new business and they haven't raised non-dilutive funding, I always have your business in mind and the strategy that you have approached to it. Because no doubt, as you rightly point out, getting an SBR grant means that obviously you go through that stage of recognizing what's the value in your product and painting that picture to the committee so that they make that decision. So you're almost moving the technology further along by just applying for those grants and gaining them. And on top of that, then you get money to further develop as well. So from an investor's perspective, it's a much better picture painted for them to understand the application of that technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I think it's so much validation in the process of raising because it's committees of people that are reviewing these. These are competitive grants. I mean, it's some cases 10, 15% chance of winning these grants. And the fact that we've stacked them up really goes to show how innovative our technology is, but also how well structured our approach is, because the grades are not just the innovation, but do you have an approach? Do you have a team? Like they look at the commercialization plan. Is that real? Is there a problem you're solving? So it really is vetting the business, not just the technology, to win these grants.
So you've mentioned team, and obviously that's an important key factor in any business. Obviously you have the amazing product, but you have an amazing team around you as well. And maybe you can elaborate more in terms of how you structured and how you brought those group of people together.
Well, that's an evolving as well, right? So we started out with a few employees and then to 8. Now we're over 20 employees. We essentially have our full functional team in place. Of course, we have R&D, which is huge, and now regulatory and clinical, marketing, manufacturing, quality, all the relevant functional areas are there with leadership. That had to build over time. We have a lot of room to grow for each one of those domains. But what has worked, though, is within the R&D organization, that's probably where the majority of the workforce sits. And that takes sort of like a matrix approach, which is known, where you have individuals that run indications and projects. So they understand the clinical problem, the surgeon really well. And so they run the project vertically and understand that indication. And then we have those across the matrix on another dimension that are technical experts, whether it's biology or chemistry. It could be development testing, right? Those are experts. And that's really important too, because to go across our platform, we're doing the same biocompatibility testing. We're doing our technology, chemistry is similar. And so to be able to explain it to regulators and do testing, there's a replication that's involved. And so that's a really key part of our organization, is the matrix organization within R&D, both understanding the indications, but then understanding the technology and the intersection of the two. But yeah, that defines our structure today. But there's huge opportunities. Like I said before, we will grow our clinical development team, even though we will partner as we move forward. There's sort of like a hybrid approach to take. We don't want to give away that entirely, because it's fundamental to be able to run these studies and have relationships with the surgeons and the hospitals that are conducting the surgeries, while leveraging the know-how from the clinical research organizations that we work with.
Thank you. And you're in Series A at the moment, and I'm curious to know what fundamentally changes in the investor story from science risk to execution and then going on to commercialization.
Yes, I think you asked earlier about clinical outcomes. That's a key question we get asked by these institutional investors. They understand that at the end of the day, we have to get through these trials, and what makes it market successful is, are you meeting your clinical endpoints? What are those risks? And so we spend more time focusing on that. In addition, reimbursement, right? And so reimbursement has never really been a focus early on during our investment process, but it is now. What they want to know is, yes, you met your clinical endpoints, but are they meaningful, right? And will that lead to reimbursement? And so we've engaged, for example, our cranial flap product, while we're in clinical study, we work with CMS, and we were able to get approval on the reimbursement for our clinical study standard of care costs. So even though we're doing an experimental trial, any part of the trial that's standard of care, that can be reimbursed through standard insurance, at least CMS. And often private insurance adopts the policies of CMS. So standard of care elementary tasks in a study are being covered by insurance. That's a big deal. In addition, our product, Tetranite, we can actually charge in our study and make revenue while we're conducting the study, because that also has been reviewed by CMS and has been approved. And so I think it's really important for institutional investors to know we have clinically meaningful endpoints, and that our head is thinking through how our product is going to be reimbursed in future surgeries. And so that's kind of where a lot of focus is right now.
Yeah. And you and I have had a lengthy conversation off camera in terms of positioning the business and how investors see your current strategy. Mm-hmm. Platform companies are sometimes struggling because of the depth of the platform itself. And at the same time, investors are inclined to invest in platform technologies as well. So how do you tell the story without it feeling too broad and at the same time capturing investors' attention?
We certainly start with a focused indication, cranial flap, and show our advanced progress. We're in a pivotal study. We know the meaningful outcomes. There's a reimbursement story. So at very least, they can get their head around that and see that this thing is close to the finish line and is very well positioned to potentially be commercially successful. Then we unveil the platform, and we don't talk about it theoretically. It's not like we're like, and then we're going to do all these things. We're actually doing it. And if they're concerned about that, we have history, right? We can go back 3, 4, 5 years when we started these programs. We can show them the milestones we hit. We can show them how capital efficient we were with grant funding. And so hopefully they can begin to put it together. So we try not to lead with the platform anymore because that can be confusing to anyone. We lead with a very defined product that we're developing for an indication, and then we unveil the indication. So we let an indication lead, but we show what the full potential is in a natural evolution of the pitch. And then, there's always follow-up discussions and due diligence. That's where the story becomes really rich, and they can see for themselves that this is not theoretical. This is actually happening, as I talked about before, with all the indications and where we are in the development process.
I mean, it's an amazing story, no doubt. And I think the potential of developing 7 indications in parallel for any investor that's sensible in their approach would be something that they would definitely be interested in looking deeper. From your experience, what type of an investor gets RevBio fastest? And what are the biggest pushbacks you usually hear?
I do think it helps to have someone on the front that understands musculoskeletal disease, let's just call it, versus cardiovascular, because I go to a lot of investor conferences, and no doubt that cardiovascular disease is a big problem. And so naturally, there should be a lot of money that's dedicated towards solving that. But so isn't musculoskeletal disease. I mean, more people go to the doctor because of pain that's associated with joints, etc. And so it's probably somewhat unrealized as a problem. So having a potential lead investor that has invested in this space and understands it, I think that's really important. So we do tend to look for those, look for funds that might have an allocation of funding for musculoskeletal health, orthopedics. You could double tap into that. There are successes out there. There's failures. So we have to compete and tell the story. Why are we going to be successful where others before you failed? It was a hope. It was a dream, right? And so we try to just take them through what we've accomplished, and we try to show where they failed in the past and how we're different, right? How products in the past had a lot of hype and then they failed. And so a lot of work goes into answering those questions. And so that's important. But hopefully, I think we have a very well-rounded approach, and it's built on history and experience. This isn't something that just popped up a year ago, right? Like, this has been under development, and there's been a lot of work and proof points along the way to show people what we've done. So I think that mitigates a lot of the risk for people. So hopefully that our approach is unique that way, and will lead to the success in raising the funding that we're looking for.
Yeah, no doubt. And looking ahead, curious to know, do you see RevBio scaling independently into a multi-indication platform as we've discussed, or positioning for a strategic exit? And what would an ideal outlook look like?
Well, I think another cool thing about RevBio is there's a lot of options, right? I think you start with what's typical. Typically, a company like us will take risk out of a product and get it to market, and then a strategic would acquire it. So that certainly could happen. What's unique about our program is that we have a few different indications we talk about that are sort of grouped into different business units, if you will. A lot of the incumbent companies that are out there, say in the orthopedic field, understand that, and they play in that space. Those are different than those that deal with oral health, dental companies. So to try to find one company that will take all of the value and all the indications is probably very limited. But it does mean there could be a couple exits. And some people see that as complex. Some people see that as an opportunity. Well, that's great. You could exit once, and maybe there's upside for a second exit as the technologies mature. And then there's the opportunity of an IPO, which, if the timing was right, like if we were IPO ready today, which we're not, today might not be the best, or maybe it's starting to get better. Or in the last couple of years, it was not great. But maybe in a few years, that timing will be better. There'll be a lot of evidence of IPOs and successes. And a company like us with multiple revenue streams, as we talked about with these different indications, it may be a great opportunity for an IPO exit event. And so back to what I said, we have a diverse platform. So diversity helps mitigate risk in some ways, but we also have optionality for exits. Could be strategics, like you said, or potentially an IPO.
Thank you. It's a very nice, compelling story, and I very much appreciate you sharing it with us. And for anyone interested, I'll make sure that we include some contact details below the podcast so that people can reach out to you. But I thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your story with us.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Nice one.
Thanks.
Awesome, Brian.